I have been building little tree models to help me illustrate a fundamental in pruning large trees. And they started all to look like this. They're a little bit too rigid to help me illustrate the point, even though they look kind of cool. So instead of using this nice-ish looking one, in order to make my point in this video, we're going to have to use this. Here's our setup. Here's our really cool and ornate looking tree. This is where I park my cool van, and I want to make sure that this tree, specifically this limb, is a reasonably safe structure to park my van beneath. And before I do any pruning on this tree, an important axiom to understand is that I want to prune the least amount from this tree in order to accomplish my objectives. More cutting isn't good for the tree. All of the tree parts are important, right? And a more whole and intact tree is a healthier tree. So using this little model, I'm going to show how this limb reacts based on where we make our cuts. So let's say I make some cuts close to the base of this stem, close to the trunk. Pay attention to the tip of the stem that we're trying to make safer. So if I take 1/3 of the weight off here, the tip of the stem hasn't really moved much at all. That's because the center of mass, even though 1/3 of the weight's been taken off, the center of mass has moved further out, away from the trunk and closer to the end of the limb. I'll get into it in a bit, but there are some consequences to that. On the other hand, if instead of removing limbs close to the trunk, if we're good at pruning, we come out to the tips, out to the periphery of the stem. Now watch this area if I do some weight reduction on the end. I have taken the same amount of weight off, roughly 1/3, and the stem has popped up significantly. When we do this, not only do we alleviate the torque placed on the branch union, we also move the center of mass of the stem closer to the trunk. When we remove all of the interior limbs from larger stems, we have made the center of mass very far away from the trunk. And statistically, these limbs with this type of architecture are far more likely to break in heavy winds or heavy ice, heavy rain, than limbs that are reduced. In other words, limbs that have a very far center of mass away from the trunk are more likely to fail than limbs that have a closer center of mass closer to the trunk. And there is a gigantic mountain of evidence that supports that claim. There are a lot of benefits to doing reduction rather than removal of the entire limb. Won't get into that here, but if you're familiar with my work, you know I have a lot to say about this subject. So next time you're out looking in your neighborhood at trees, take a look at some of the large limbs. If you see limbs that have this type of architecture, they are fundamentally less safe than trees with limbs that have this architecture. And the whole point of hiring arborists in the first place, or tree care companies, or tree trimmers, whoever, the whole point is to make your trees safer. And if they're doing this, they're not.